Well, thanks for joining us today again for another day of wild and crazy news. We've got some great stories for you here and giving you the insights, some of the behind the scenes stuff that you may not be aware of. And let's jump right into this. Thanks again for the new viewers we've got and listeners today. Thanks for increasing on these files. And don't hesitate to give me feedback. Let me know if there's some topics that you think I might be missing. We'll try and give you what would be interesting for you each day. So we see Prime Minister Carney and President Trump. There they were, head to head in the Oval Office, duking it out in a kind of a warm and loving way. Definitely a lot of smiles, but a lot of heavy-duty stuff behind the scenes. Do you know what doesn't help in these discussions? And I say this knowing, and our viewers and listeners will know, I have many differences in terms of policy with Mr. Carney. But when he goes down there and then he comes back, we've just seen a flood today of all kinds of mainly former Liberal members of Parliament, former Liberal cabinet ministers. And here we have Prime Minister Carney. Now, look, I don't agree with all the approaches, but he's trying to hammer out some deals and get some things done. And we have his own party members blasting away at the U.S., firing, dumping all over them, dumping on President Trump, really going after their Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth. And look, we may have some differences of opinion. And I have served in government on, for instance, I chaired the Cabinet Committee on Afghanistan. I was in Afghanistan itself a couple of different times, out with our troops on the front lines, not nearly as dangerous situations as they had to face every day. But you know what? When we have former Liberal members trashing things that are to do with the present policy in the U.S. and dumping all over them and saying that Canadians and Canadian military may not be working in cooperation with the U.S. because here on the Canadian side, some of our members of Parliament, former ones, and even senior staff members don't like the tone, they don't like the language coming out of the U.S. You know what? There's a process and there's a way to address those things. I find you want to get things done, you want to air your differences, you go direct to the people, you don't blast off just from what you're hearing in media. It is not helpful. And it's over the last few years, it's consistently, and it's mainly former Liberal members of Parliament blasting away at President Trump, blasting away, and not just articulating differences of opinion, but sliding into name-calling, all kinds of derogatory stuff that does not help when you're dealing with the White House in the U.S. and your Prime Minister has just come back after having some tough negotiations. Blasting away like this doesn't help because that just feeds the beast, as they say, people who don't like Canada on the U.S., and there are some. I think most of the administration, deals with Canada as they feel they have to deal with, but you're just feeding those who just want to be antagonistic all the time, and they'll go running to the president and say, look, Canada hates you, Canada's laughing at us, Canada's doing this. Former Liberal MPs, smarten up. You had your shot, you had your day, get yourself a podcast, maybe like this, but don't muddy the waters while the PM is trying to get something done. It is not helpful. And you know what else isn't helpful? When I see former members of maybe not the military itself, but people who were involved in administrative decisions, one of the things they're screaming the loudest is diversity is our strength. And they're saying they're going after the U.S. policy of not allowing transgender into combat situations in the military. And here in Canada, we've got officials saying that's a terrible thing. We should be allowing that. Diversity is our strength. You know what? In wartime, unity is your strength. Fighting together as a unit and not worrying about strange things you don't even understand about the person who might be jammed in that armored vehicle right beside you. You know what? Diversity is not our strength. Diversity is important, but unity is our strength when it comes to combat. So I'm just telling you, Canadian officials, Do you know what the Americans think and American soldiers think when they say we should be advocating for transgender in combat positions? They don't think very much. And our enemies, by the way, can't wait to meet those types on the battlefield. So let's stop saying silly things. Let's remember that we've got a job to do when it comes to internationally working together at times with other nations and with other military. So let's just, keep in mind something that goes back quite a ways, a good saying that loose lips sink ships. So let's focus and let's let our government get on with doing the things they have to do. And we're all going to progress because of that if we proceed that way. On the domestic front, very concerning to see the head of the National Bank of Canada, and he's been making quite a bit of commentary lately, and it's difficult, the things he's saying, but I think it's important. He's commenting on the fact that it now looks like the federal budget, the deficit, just the deficit, is leaping from what they thought it was going to be just as late as January. They thought the annual deficit was going to be in the range of $42 billion. It's now going to be over $100 billion. Look, I know these are huge figures, and $1 billion is still a lot of money these days any way you look at it. So when you look at your deficit projections, definitely more than doubling, maybe tripling by the time we get this out. This is not good. And Prime Minister Carney and his team have to realize you're going to have to bite the bullet, as they say, and you're going to have to run the risk that your friends in the mainstream media are not going to be happy if you start to reduce spending in areas where government shouldn't be involved. You've just got to rein it in. And if I can, let's leap back to 1993, and I'm going to give a Liberal some credit here. It was Paul Martin, who was Minister of Finance at the time. It was not Jean Chrétien, who was getting credit for the turnaround that happened in 93 to 95. But Paul Martin did some very significant things related to government spending. It involved the size of the federal public service and other areas. And he had to do that because the International Monetary Fund was looking at Canada, looking at the deficit, and saying, you're out of control. When you have too large a deficit, the problem is, then the bond agencies and the people where you go to get the funds, to borrow the funds to run the government for the next year, they start to get nervous. They start to raise their rates when they see our deficits going up. It is not a good situation. You've got to start pulling it in. Go back and reflect on Paul Martin and the work he did in turning things around. We've got to send those positive signals back to the markets, or we're going to be just spiraling downwards and actually able to afford less and less of the programming we need. Rein it in now, folks. If you're looking for areas to save money, and this would go to all levels of government. This would be provincial, this would be state, this would be federal, even municipal. Take a situation that's happening in British Columbia, Canada right now, where British Columbia is having a lot of fiscal problem because of a socialist government there. But they've got a situation where the liquor stores, the employees in the liquor stores are going on strike. Now, when I talk to my American friends and even to friends in other countries, they go, what? Wait a minute, what? Government employees are running the liquor stores? Yes, in many places they still do that. They still do that in Ontario. They still do that in British Columbia. In way back again, 93 seemed to be a pivotal year here when a premier by the name of Ralph Klein became premier in the province of Alberta. One of the things he said was, get the government out of the business of doing business. Government should be governing, but get government out of business. And we looked at the fact that we had all these liquor stores that were run by and owned by the government. And we said, what is the government doing in the business of selling booze? That should be in the private sector. Government can regulate it, of course, as they should. But why is the government, with all of the inefficiencies that come with any time you have a government operation without competition, anytime you have that in any field, you're going to have huge overspending, you're going to have inefficiencies. And so we basically you can call it outsourcing, but we changed that and we moved the entire operation of the selling of booze into the private sector. Now people will say, well, that's a devastating thing to do. There's thousands of employees there in the liquor stores. Well, one of the things we did at the time was we gave employees in liquor stores the first opportunity to become the owners of those stores, to become involved in the sale and of alcohol and the marketing and the advertising. We offered that to them, and many employee groups, many people who had been, in fact, public servants at the time, they wound up being the ones to operate on a fair bid system. They wound up acquiring the buildings, they wound up acquiring the means of distribution. And I can tell you what, Alberta did not disappear into the ether. As a matter of fact, they wound up selling very well, very efficiently, and got us out of that business, and certainly got us out of the strain that always comes when those who like to have their alcohol are not able to do that because government workers go on strike. So there's a suggestion to you, provincial, state, or federal governments, if you're still in the crazy business of selling booze, like Ontario, when you look at that situation, just reminding people, one of the largest purchasers of alcohol in the world is the Ontario Liquor Board. Those people, they travel the world and go to all the fancy alcohol tasting and distribution markets and fairs all around the world. There are huge extra costs anytime a government gets involved in selling that. And those extra costs then result sometimes in dumb policies, like the policy where the Premier of British Columbia, he feels he's going to make gains and lash out against the U.S. by not buying, telling his government employees, don't go out and buy any more American beer. We know how we'll hurt those Americans. We're going to cut off the beer sales or the beer purchases from the U.S. And you know what we're going to do instead? We're going to keep buying and even up our purchasing from, wait for it, yes, China. Oh, okay, that's great thinking. Here's China, which as a government is the major ally to Russia right now. Russia, of course, doing all they can to destroy Ukraine. And here's China just waiting for the chance to pounce on Taiwan. Now, we can still do business with China, but try and explain the thinking of saying no to U.S. beer, but yes to Chinese beer. This is what happens when government gets involved in businesses they shouldn't even be involved in. So we look at, there's still a bit of a battle cry on the Canadian side saying, let's not buy anything U.S. Let's just stay away from that. That's what we'll do. We'll punish the U.S. that way. It's called cutting off your nose to spite your face. There are times when that might be a strategy in terms of dealing with certain issues related to the U.S., but this broad brush approach to let's not go to the U.S., let's not buy anything from them. But guess what? They're buying from us, and in very significant ways. Just recently, over the last couple of days, it's been announced that some major mining conglomerates in the U.S. have purchased a major stake in a couple of Canadian firms. Canadian firms that are involved in the issue of rare and important minerals. The U.S. has just bought into a company called Trilogy, headquartered in Vancouver. They bought 10% of that company. Why? Because the U.S., as all countries that want to progress, need the precious metals. Canada has a fair number of those. Right now, our alliance, everybody's alliance or reliance is way too heavily on China, which has many of those metals. And so here we've got the U.S. buying Canadian. Because of the U.S., Canadian companies are going to benefit with the extra inflow of cash, and they're going to be able to explore better and more rapidly and bring jobs to Canadians and profits to Canadians. So interesting to see. Also, an American firm buying into the company called Lithium America. That's actually a company that's in Vancouver again. So here we have a situation where Americans buying into Canadian companies give infusions of cash to Canadian companies. It helps their own in the U.S. acquisition related to precious minerals, and everybody benefits. So sure, let's take the policy of not buying U.S., see how that works for you. And there's times where it may be appropriate, as I've said. And I remind people, I was talking to someone recently, sometimes we get so worked up in our own righteous indignation we wound up looking silly because talking to friends who said one of the ways they're going to strike back against the U.S., they're going to cancel their usual annual trip to Hawaii. You know, that's certainly their choice to do that. And I said, that's great. Where are you going to go instead? And they said, Cuba. Hold on a second. Hold on a minute. They're not going to support U.S., but they're going to support a communist nation and go to Cuba. So, you know, pick your battles, folks. Let's go head to head in ways that make sense. So looking at some areas in what we call culture and culture wars, people say sometimes, look, it's kind of fun and interesting that you include in your show issues that are happening in the culture scene of the day. Why do you do that? Well, even politics, as they say, is downstream of culture. We say it's downstream of culture because politicians are going to respond to the culture. It's usually not the other way around. Sometimes it is, depending on how you might want to legislate. But things that happen in culture affect even how government thinks and how citizens think. So here we've got an interesting situation where, for those of you who watch the show in the U.S., and many Canadians do, called The View, for those of you who might find that entertaining, you know, good luck to you. That's fine. Everybody has their own taste. But here we've got the famous Whoopi Goldberg, and she, of course, is advocating things which really, in many cases, are illegal in terms of the so-called resistance and how you should be breaking the law and not following the law. Her latest thing, because she is concerned that she doesn't want to see illegal immigration stop. She wants to see it continue into the U.S. So what she's recommended is for people to get out on the street and paint their faces black or dark, make themselves look like they are dark-skinned people so as to confuse the officers, the immigration officers. Now, can we just screech to a stop for a minute? You know, we almost lost a prime minister, had to almost resign, Justin Trudeau, for pictures of him with blackface on when he thought it would be interesting and cute to dress up and look like a dark person or a black person. And here we've got a so-called entertainer, Whoopi Goldberg, advising people to blackface. Talk about cultural appropriation. Sometimes, you know, as they say, there's an interesting Bible scripture. It says, professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. So let's think intelligently. If we've got differences in terms of government policy, there's ways to do it that make sense, and there's ways that certainly are not. And that brings us to, of course, one of our favorite topics. And again, Canadians by the millions watch the U.S. late-night so-called comedy shows. And Jimmy Kimmel, when he came back from after his little period of being spanked there and out in the woodshed, and he came back, that particular show, for obvious reasons, everybody wanted to see what he was going to say when he came back, so that had very high ratings. But now, it's literally only days since that, his ratings have once again plummeted to almost record lows, especially in the important demographic of 18 to 49-year-olds, which is the large purchasing bracket that advertisers look to, and ratings really dropping down to, in some areas, almost below the poor ratings that he had at the time that he was punted. So keep in mind, when you're watching those shows and you're listening to mainstream, which is culturally Marxist media has an oversized megaphone. And sometimes when you're watching those shows, remember, these are manufactured audiences, and the comedian will stand up and say something. It's a little different than being a true stand-up comedian when you go into a club, and that is nerve-wracking business. And I give points to stand-up comedians because you're putting it all out on the line. You have a couple of jokes that don't go, and that could be the end of your career. But guys like Kimmel have this manufactured audience where the people who go and line up for hours on the street to squeeze into those studios, obviously they are big fans. And so I hate to use the analogy of trained seals, but right on time, and they've been instructed before the show starts how to applaud wildly. They go crazy when he comes out with some of his lines, and it gives the impression that the whole world is applauding. Well, the ratings show the whole world is not. Jimmy is dropping again, and I don't know if the company that hires him how long they can sustain that. They obviously worry about the oversized megaphone that the left has in the media. Let's see where it goes with Jimmy. In the culture wars. Now, I am not here out. I want to talk about Taylor Swift. I'm not outing myself as a Swiftie. I don't pay all that much attention to her, but it's fascinating just the last couple of days to see her getting really scorned and ridiculed by the left, by leftist media. And why is that? Well, they love her as long as she sings to their tune and marches to their drummer. But in her latest album, which again looks like it's going to have record sales, she could be moving to multi-billionaire status, which I wonder to Bernie Sanders and to socialists in Canada who want to get rid of all billionaires. You want to get rid of Taylor also? She's a multi-billionaire. Anyway, why is the left mad at her? Well, I guess in some of her most recent songs on this album, she's singing about, oh, please forgive her, her apparent love for her husband, apparent looking at the day where she can have a house, as she sings it, with a hoop, a basketball hoop in the driveway. And of course, she has multiple houses, and she can afford entire basketball courts. Never mind the hoop. But she's just getting shellacked by the left, who's saying this is terrible. She's doing some insane things, like actually showing that she likes her man and showing that she's looking forward to having a home-type atmosphere. And they're saying, oh my goodness, is she going to turn into a trad wife? And they've lost their minds. Fascinating. When you rely on friends who can be fickle, things can go a little crazy. By the way, were they not listening with her Red album titled Red, which was, I think, 3 or 4 years ago? The song Starlight, she talked about having 10 kids. So this should be nothing new. Fascinating to see how fast the left will turn on you if you don't march to their weird drumming sound. And looking at Canada-US relations and where often these things materialize, which is on the field of sport. Great series going on if you're not watching it. Talk about Canada-US with Toronto, and the Yankees looked like Toronto was heading for the sweep with 2 big wins. And then just to see the Yankees, the biggest comeback in their franchise history, coming back in that game from being down 6-1, looking like they were out to the count. Aaron steps up to the bat, of course, the judge, and hammers that, I believe was a 3-run homer, and on they go to victory. That series ain't over yet, folks, but I like the fact that we have moved beyond the silly thing that first happened when Trump came after us on the tariff wars, and you had fans, actually, Canadian fans, booing another country's national anthem. I'm glad we've moved past that silliness. Let's have good debate. Let's have a good series, and let's have all the usual back and forth and enjoy where this series is going to go. We'll talk about that more tomorrow. Thanks for joining in.